Before you immerse yourself in tonight's terror, hit that subscribe button if you think you can handle even darker stories lurking in the shadows. Let me tell you about something that happened to me. You know how people always say it's just a simple night job or easy money? Yeah, well, this wasn't one of those stories. So I got this job at the Lyric Theater. You might know it, that old place downtown with all the fancy gold trim and those massive marble columns out front. The place has definitely seen better days, but they've fixed it up enough to show movies during the day. Pretty decent setup, actually. They've got this mix of modern screens, but kept all the vintage charm, you know what I mean? I was hired as the night guard. Sounds straightforward, right? Man, I wish someone had warned me. The pay was good. $18 an hour just to walk around and make sure nobody breaks in and steals their expensive projection equipment. I thought I'd just bring my phone, maybe watch some Netflix between rounds. Boy, was I wrong. So during my orientation, get this, I meet the manager. Picture this really intense woman, probably in her 50s, wearing this crisp black suit that looked like it was tailored in the 1940s. She had this, I don't know how to describe it, this energy about her that made my skin crawl. You know when you meet someone and something just feels off? That was her. She barely said 2 words during the whole orientation, just kept staring at me with these piercing gray eyes. Then right at the end, she pulls out this beaten-up leather notebook. The pages were all yellow and dog-eared, like something you'd find in your grandma's attic. She hands it to me, and I kid you not, her exact words were, "Do not disregard these." The way she said it, dead serious, like she was telling me how to disarm a bomb. Inside were these rules, written in this shaky handwriting that looked ancient. Let me read them to you exactly as they were written. Rule 1. Never approach row 6 in the auditorium, no matter what you see. Rule 2. If you hear whispers from the balcony, do not look up. Rule 3. The storage room must remain locked at all times. Rule 4. If you hear music from the sound booth, leave the auditorium immediately. Rule 5. Between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., avoid the projector room. Rule 6. If the stage lights turn on by themselves, leave the building without hesitation. I remember reading these and trying not to laugh. I mean, come on, right? I thought it was some kind of hazing ritual for the new guy. You know how older employees like to mess with newcomers? I even made this nervous little chuckle, but the manager? She didn't even blink. Just stared at me until I stopped laughing, then walked away without another word. So anyway, my first night starts at 10 p.m. Let me tell you about walking into that place after dark. You know how empty buildings feel weird? This was different. The moment I stepped inside, it felt like the air got heavier. The lobby that looked so nice during the day felt massive and wrong somehow. My footsteps echoed off the walls, no matter how quietly I tried to walk, and the beam from my flashlight seemed to get swallowed up by the darkness. Even the emergency exit signs seemed dimmer than they should have been. The floor kept creaking under my feet. Old buildings, right? But each creak made me jump a little higher than the last. I kept telling myself I was being stupid, that it was just an old building settling. But man, something about those rules kept nagging at the back of my mind. Why would they even need rules like that? What kind of place needs to tell you not to approach a specific row of seats? Little did I know, I was about to find out exactly why those rules existed. And trust me, by the end of that night, I wished I'd taken them more seriously from the start. So after wandering around the lobby for a while, checking doors and windows, I knew I had to do my first real patrol of the auditorium. It was around 11 p.m. I remember checking my phone and thinking, just 7 more hours to go. God, I was so naive. You know how theaters feel weirdly huge when they're empty? This one was massive, over 1,000 seats easy, with these ornate balconies and this impossibly high ceiling that disappeared into darkness. My flashlight beam looked pathetically small in there. The air was stale and had this weird metallic smell, like old pennies. I started my usual routine, walking down the center aisle, sweeping my flashlight across the seats. The beam would catch the brass seat numbers, making them glint like tiny eyes in the dark. Everything was fine until, and I still get chills thinking about this, my light passed over row 6. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. You know how sometimes shadows can look like people? But these were definitely figures, just sitting there, perfectly still, like they were watching a show. Their heads, though, they were all tilted at these impossible angles, like their necks were broken. I'm talking complete right angles here, man, the kind of angles that human bodies just can't make. My whole body went cold. You ever have that feeling where your stomach just drops and your legs turn to jelly? That rule from the notebook suddenly made perfect sense. Rule 1, never approach row 6. I started backing away, my shoes squeaking against the floor, which seemed way too loud in that silence. Then, and I swear this is true, I heard this sound. You know when you crack your knuckles? Imagine that, but way louder and wet, like something moist being twisted. The sound echoed through the whole auditorium. Everything in me screamed not to look back, but you know when you just can't help yourself? I turned around and, Jesus. Every single one of those figures had their heads turned completely backward, facing me. Not just turned to look over their shoulders, I mean completely backward, 180 degrees. Their faces, I couldn't see them clearly in the dark, thank God, but I could feel them staring at me. I've never run so fast in my life. I practically flew up that aisle, nearly tripping over my own feet. The sound of my running echoed off the walls, and I swear I could hear something else echoing too, like multiple footsteps, just slightly out of sync with mine. I didn't stop until I reached the lobby, and I stayed there for a good 20 minutes, just trying to catch my breath. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my flashlight. But you know what the worst part was? I knew I'd have to go back in there eventually. It was only 11:30, and my shift wasn't even close to being over. After that nightmare with row 6, I needed to continue my patrol, company policy, you know. Plus, standing still just made everything worse. So I headed up to the second floor, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen was just my imagination playing tricks on me. The staircase was this old, curved thing with worn carpet that might have been red once. Every step I took made the wood groan under my feet. The second floor was actually worse than the main auditorium, if you can believe it. It had these long, narrow corridors lined with old show posters behind cracked glass. My flashlight kept catching reflections in the glass, making it look like something was moving behind me. The air up there was different too, colder and thick with this musty smell like wet cardboard. I was checking the emergency exits when I heard it, footsteps above me, in the upper balcony. At first, I thought maybe it was just the building settling, you know? But no, these were definitely footsteps. Light ones, like someone trying to walk quietly but not quite managing it. Then the whispers started. Have you ever heard someone whisper your name when you're alone? It was like that, but wrong somehow. The voices sounded almost excited, like kids playing a game. Why won't you watch us? The whisper came from right above me, and my whole body just locked up. That's when Rule 2 flashed through my mind. If you hear whispers from the balcony, do not look up. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, staring at this old poster for the Phantom of the Opera, like my life depended on it. The whispers got more intense, multiple voices now, all talking over each other, getting louder and more desperate. Look at us! Look at us! My hands were clenched so tight around my flashlight, my knuckles were white. Then, God, I still remember this perfectly. I felt something warm hit my hand. Just a single drop at first. I looked down, big mistake, and in the beam of my flashlight I could see it was blood. Fresh blood, still warm. Another drop hit my sleeve, then another. I could hear this soft patter around me like the beginning of rain, but, well, you get the picture. I don't even remember running down those stairs. It's all a blur of pounding feet and those whispers chasing me down. I just remember thinking, don't look up, don't look up, don't look up, over and over again. The whispers followed me all the way down, getting more and more angry, until I finally burst back into the main lobby. You'd think after something like that, I would have just quit right there, right? But I couldn't. Something about that place, it was like being trapped in a nightmare you can't wake up from. And besides, the night wasn't even half over yet. After that whole balcony nightmare, I found myself back downstairs, walking through this narrow maintenance corridor. You know those back hallways in theaters that the public never sees? This one was lined with pipes and electrical boxes, and the walls were this dingy yellow color that looked sickly in my flashlight beam. I was walking past the storage room, this heavy wooden door with peeling black paint and a brass handle, when I heard it. At first, it was so faint I thought I was imagining things again. But no, it was definitely crying. Like a little kid crying, you know? That soft, hiccuping kind of sob that just breaks your heart. Now, I'm not a parent, but I've got nieces and nephews, and that sound, it just triggers something in you. My hand was on that door handle before I even realized what I was doing. The metal was ice cold against my palm. Then Rule 3 hit me like a bucket of cold water. The storage room must remain locked at all times. No exceptions. But the crying, God, it got louder. Now it sounded like the kid was right on the other side of the door. These desperate, gasping sobs that made my chest hurt. My hand was shaking on that handle, and I swear I felt it turn slightly under my grip. Not me turning it, but something from the other side. The crying turned into these horrible, gut-wrenching wails. Like whatever was in there knew I wasn't going to open the door. I don't know where I found the strength, but I managed to pull my hand away. Every step I took down that hallway felt like I was dragging lead weights. The wailing followed me, getting louder and more desperate. Then, and this is the part that still haunts me, it just stopped. Mid-wail, like someone hit a mute button. That silence was somehow worse than the crying. I could feel it pressing against my ears, like being underwater. I practically ran back to the main lobby, and I remember checking my phone with trembling hands. It was just past midnight. I still had 6 hours to go, and I already felt like I was losing my mind. But you know what's really messed up? That wasn't even the scariest thing that happened that night. After what happened at the storage room, I had to go back to the auditorium. Company policy required hourly checks of the main theater. Though honestly, at this point, I was wondering if whoever wrote that policy had ever actually worked a night shift here. I was standing in the back of the auditorium by the entrance doors when it happened. You know those stage lights theaters have? Well, they started flickering to life, one by one. Not the smooth, professional way they do during shows, but this jerky, stuttering motion, like someone was playing with the switches. Rule 6 immediately flashed through my mind. If the stage lights turn on by themselves, leave the building without hesitation. Simple enough, right? I started backing toward the exit, but something made me freeze. The seats, every single seat in that massive auditorium, they were all filled. Not with people, exactly. More like, you know when you see a shadow move out of the corner of your eye? Imagine hundreds of those, all sitting perfectly still, all facing the stage. The air felt electric, like right before a thunderstorm. Then the stage curtain started rising. The mechanism made this awful grinding noise, like it was being forced up. And there, hanging from the rafters, God, I can barely talk about this part. It was me. Not someone who looked like me. It was me. Same clothes I was wearing, same security badge hanging from my belt. Just hanging there, swaying slightly. The worst part, the shadow audience, they loved it. They started applauding, this thunderous sound that felt like it was coming from inside my head. You ever been to a concert where the music is so loud you can feel it in your chest? It was like that, but worse. Each clap felt like it was shaking the building. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of concrete. The figure on stage, my body, its head slowly turned toward me, neck cracking, and I don't really remember running out. Just fragments. The sound of my boots on the carpet, the applause following me, the feeling that if I looked back, I'd see all those shadow figures chasing me. I ended up in a service corridor, doubled over, trying not to throw up. My watch said it was almost 1 a.m. I thought about quitting right then, just walking out. But something told me that leaving might be even more dangerous than staying. After seeing my own body hanging from those rafters, I found myself wandering the upper levels again, trying to avoid the auditorium. The sound booth was up there. You know that little room where they control all the audio during shows? I was checking the doors when I heard it, this faint violin music, just barely audible. At first, I thought it might be coming from outside, maybe someone's car or something. But then I remembered Rule 4. If you hear music from the sound booth, leave the auditorium immediately. The thing is, I was already there. Well, you know how sometimes curiosity just gets the better of you, even when you know it's a terrible idea? The music was getting clearer, this haunting melody I didn't recognize. It sounded old, like something from centuries ago, played on a scratchy record. I crept closer to the sound booth's viewing window and looked down into the auditorium. There he was, standing in what used to be the orchestra pit. This tall, thin figure in what must have been an elegant conductor's suit once, but now it was all torn and rotted like it had been buried and dug up. He was just standing there, completely motionless, with his baton raised in the air. But there was no orchestra, no musicians, just him and that ghostly violin music coming from nowhere. You ever have one of those moments where you know you should look away, but you just can't? That's what happened to me. I stood there, gripping the window ledge, watching this impossible scene play out. Then the music just stopped, not faded out, just cut off mid-note. And the conductor, God, I'll never forget this, he turned around to face me. It wasn't a normal turning motion, more like someone rotating a mannequin. His face, where his eyes should have been, there were just these dark, empty sockets. But somehow, I knew he was looking right at me. His mouth opened, way too wide for a human face, and he whispered, "Your turn." His voice, it sounded like dry leaves scraping across pavement, but somehow I heard it perfectly clear, like he was right next to me. I ran, again. At this point, I was getting pretty good at running away from things in that theater. I could hear that violin music starting up again behind me, getting louder and more frenzied, like the whole orchestra had joined in. But I didn't stop, didn't look back. I just ran until I couldn't hear it anymore. By now it was getting close to 2 a.m., and I was really starting to lose it. After that encounter with the conductor, something strange started happening. You know that feeling when you're being pulled somewhere? Like a magnet or something? My feet just started moving on their own, taking me up these narrow maintenance stairs I hadn't even noticed before. I found myself on the top floor, where they keep all the projection equipment, modern digital stuff mostly, but there were still some old film reels scattered around, their metal cases covered in decades of dust. The room smelled like old metal and ozone, with this low electrical hum coming from somewhere I couldn't pinpoint. That's when I noticed something that definitely wasn't part of the theater's equipment. This massive antique mirror, easily 7 feet tall, with this ornate gold frame that seemed to absorb my flashlight beam rather than reflect it. It looked completely out of place among all the technical equipment, like someone had stolen it from some ancient mansion. I tried to keep my eyes off it. Something about its placement just felt wrong, you know? But it was like trying not to think about something. The more you try, the more it consumes you. My flashlight beam caught the mirror's surface, and that's when I saw my reflection. Except it wasn't quite right. The me in the mirror looked eager, expectant, and then it blinked. Just once, while I was definitely not blinking. My whole body went cold. That's when Rule 5 hit me like a truck. Between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., avoid the projector room. I checked my phone, 2:13 a.m. I was already 13 minutes too late. I turned to leave, my shoes crunching on decades of dust and debris, when this voice came from the mirror. It wasn't loud, barely more than a breath, but it cut through the room like a knife. Stay, and she'll live. The mirror's surface, it changed, like someone had turned it into liquid mercury. And there was my sister Sarah, tied to this old wooden chair in what looked like a basement. She was crying, mascara running down her face, trying to scream through the duct tape over her mouth. I could see blood trickling from where the ropes had cut into her wrists. I knew it couldn't be real. Sarah was supposed to be at home, 3 states away, but the terror in her eyes, it was too real. I called her name, and she looked up right at me, her eyes widening with recognition. My hand moved toward the mirror before I could stop myself. The surface felt like ice water, and as soon as I touched it, it started pulling me in. Not violently, but with this gentle, inexorable force, like being caught in a river current. Everything went black for a moment, and then I was standing center stage in the auditorium. The spotlight was blinding, but I could still see them. Hundreds of shadow figures filling every seat, watching me with invisible eyes. The rotting conductor stood in the orchestra pit, his baton raised, those empty eye sockets fixed on me. His voice filled the theater, echoing from every direction. Play your part. It wasn't the dry leaves whisper from before. This was like thunder, like the voice of something that had been waiting centuries for this moment. The shadow audience leaned forward in their seats, eager, hungry. The stage lights grew brighter, and I could feel the heat on my skin. That's when I realized I wasn't just part of the audience anymore. I had become part of the show. After that moment on stage, with the conductor and all those shadow figures watching me, everything gets fuzzy. You know how sometimes you can't remember parts of a really traumatic experience? It's like that, but worse. I have these fragments, these flashes of memory, the sound of hundreds of voices singing in a language I didn't understand, the feeling of something cold wrapping around my wrists, the conductor's baton moving in these impossible patterns through the air. And my sister's voice, screaming my name, getting fainter and fainter. The next clear memory I have is finding myself sprawled on the sidewalk outside the theater, the cold concrete against my face, gasping for air like I'd just run a marathon. The street lights were on, but they seemed impossibly bright after all that darkness. I could taste copper in my mouth, and my clothes were soaked with sweat. That notebook the manager gave me, it was lying right next to me, but when I picked it up, every single page was blank. Not just empty, blank like they'd never been written on at all. Even the cover looked different, newer somehow. First thing I did was call my sister. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial the number. She answered groggy. It was like 3 a.m. after all, but she was fine, completely fine. Said she'd been asleep for hours, but sometimes I wonder if what I saw in that mirror was something that hasn't happened yet. I quit that job the next day, didn't even go back for my last paycheck. The manager didn't seem surprised when I called, just said they usually don't last long and hung up. But here's the thing, I don't think I really escaped. You know how sometimes you catch movement in a mirror out of the corner of your eye? Ever since that night, I see them. Those shadow figures standing behind me, their heads tilted at those same impossible angles I saw in row 6. They never do anything, just watch, waiting. I drove past the Lyric last week. Had to, for work. It looks the same as ever, that faded grandeur, those columns out front. But now I know what it really is. It's not just a theater, it's hungry. And I think somehow it's still watching me. Like that night was just the beginning of something bigger. I keep wondering about the other security guards, you know? The ones who came before me. Where are they now? Are they seeing the same things I see in their mirrors? Or did they play their parts? So yeah, that's my story. I haven't told many people about this. I mean, would you? But sometimes late at night I can still hear that violin music just on the edge of hearing. And I know deep down that the Lyric Theater isn't done with me. Not by a long shot. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more creepy stories. Stay safe, and see you in the next nightmare.